I cannot fail. My village depends on me. The chilling thought echoed in the mind of the widower Yakutia as the guttural howl of 800 hungry wolves tore through the deadly silence of the polar night. At 70 to sea, each breath burned his lungs, and the crunching snow beneath his feet seemed to scream imminent danger. His almost frozen fingers barely gripped the ancestral spear, the last vestige of hope between his people and the lurking famine. The pack closed in, red eyes like infernal embers glowing in the merciless darkness, and he knew this would not just be a hunt, but a desperate battle against time and death itself. And what he did in the next few hours would seal everyone's fate. The palpable tension in the air was sharper than the cold itself. The widower Yakutia, whose name was Ayana, felt his heart clench in his chest, a familiar pain that came not only from the recent grief for his beloved wife, but now also from the icy terror threatening his people. He gritted his teeth, his breath freezing in the air before dissipating into small white clouds. His eyes, accustomed to the gloom of the polar night, swept the landscape, trying to discern the true extent of the pack. They were not just 800 points of red light, they were moving shadows, a sea of predators stirring, hungry at the edge of the herd, their distant howls now turning into low, menacing growls. Ayana took a deep breath, the icy air burning his nostrils and lungs, and pulled his ancestral spear a little closer. The ancient wood, polished by generations of strong hands, seemed to vibrate with the memory of countless hunts and defenses. He was not alone. The spirit of his people was with him, and the silent promise he had made to his wife to protect what remained of them echoed in every beat of his heart. Far from there, in the heart of the village, elder Anya, her hair white as freshly fallen snow, sat by the crackling fire, her eyes, marked by years of harsh winters and losses, fixed on the tent entrance, as if she could see through the reindeer-hide walls the lurking danger. She knew Ayana had gone to face the impossible. Her grandmother's heart, though he was not her blood grandson, ached with worry and a pang of helplessness. The children slept soundly, their innocent faces illuminated by the flickering firelight, oblivious to the silent battle being fought outside, a battle for their very existence. Anya murmured an ancient prayer, a whispered melody of hope and supplication, asking the spirits of earth and sky to guide and protect the widower, the village's last bulwark. Ayana was the last hope, the remaining pillar. Without him, without the herd that represented life, the village would not survive another week. The weight of responsibility was an invisible burden that everyone carried, but which Ayana had taken on alone, with a courage that transcended fear. Back on the frozen plain, Ayana felt the urgency to act, but also the need for intelligence. He couldn't attack head-on. The pack was too vast, and he, just one man, however strong. The wisdom of his father and his father's father echoed in his mind, words passed down through generations, whispered on cold nights. The wolf is cunning, but man is patient. Use the wind, use the terrain, use fear to turn the tide in your favor. He remembered an ancient tactic, taught to ward off large groups of animals without unnecessary bloodshed. Fire. Not a large, uncontrollable fire that could spread across the tundra, but small, strategic flames lit at specific points. He carried a small bag of dry kindling, resin, and a piece of flint, essential items for Arctic survival. His fingers, though numb and stiff from the intense cold, began to work with a precision sharpened by necessity. Each movement was deliberate, each spark a silent prayer. He wasn't there to kill all the wolves, but to create a psychological barrier, a boundary of fire and smoke they wouldn't dare cross, and, in the process, carefully select the prey that would ensure his people's sustenance. The task seemed impossible, a challenge that would test not only his physical strength, but the very essence of his spirit and the depth of his resilience. The image of his wife, smiling in his dearest memories, gave him a new wave of courage, a warmth that for an instant seemed to defy the biting cold of 71 degrees C. He could not give in to despair. He was the guardian, and the life of his village depended on his steadfastness. Ayana, his fingers stiff with cold but driven by iron determination, scraped the flint against the tinder. The first spark, a tiny point of light in the dark immensity, seemed a miracle. He shielded it with his body, bending over the kindling and resin, feeling the faint warmth radiating. The smell of smoke, faint at first, soon intensified, and a small flame danced on the snow. Carefully, he fed the fire, transforming it into an improvised torch. The orange glow, contrasting with the dark blue of the night, drew the attention of the nearest wolves. Louder growls echoed, and some animals retreated, hesitant. Ayana repeated the process, lighting small fires at strategic points, creating a line of light and smoke that began to encircle the vulnerable herd. With each rising flame, a wave of mixed hope and dread coursed through Ayana. He felt the biting cold in his bones, but the warmth of purpose burned stronger. The image of his wife, smiling gently, mingled with the faces of the village children who slept peacefully, unaware of the imminent danger. He could not fail. The ancestral tactic of using fire was not to kill, but to create a psychological barrier, a boundary that predators, however hungry, would hesitate to cross. As the flames danced, casting ghostly shadows on the snow, Ayana observed the vast pack. The wolves, though numerous, showed signs of confusion and caution. Their red eyes still gleamed, but the mass movement became less cohesive. In the village, Anya couldn't sleep a wink. The fire in her tent seemed pale and insufficient to ward off the darkness she felt outside. She rose, her knees creaking, and went to the entrance, pulling the reindeer hide aside. The icy wind whipped her face, but she didn't care. Her eyes peered into the darkness, searching for any sign, any indication that Ayana was well. She saw nothing but the snow and the starry sky, but felt a pang of deep anxiety. The silence at times was more terrifying than the howls. She knelt again, her wrinkled hands clasped, and her prayers became more fervent, a desperate whisper mingling with the wind. Ancestral spirits, protect our guardian. He is our last hope. Outside, Ayana felt the weight of every prayer, every hope placed upon him. The small fires, now more numerous, formed a protective semicircle around the herd, driving away most of the pack. But some wolves, the boldest and hungriest, tried to flank the flames, seeking a breach. Ayana knew it was time to act. With the spear firmly gripped, he moved with the agility of an experienced hunter, taking advantage of the confusion created by the fire and smoke. He wasn't seeking a direct confrontation with the horde, but rather the opportunity to isolate some of the most robust predators, distant from the main group, those that would be crucial for the village's vital sustenance. His heart pounded, a drum in the icy night. He chose his target, a large, dark-furred wolf, moving with remarkable ferocity, ignoring the flames. Ayana crept, using the shadows and deep snow as cover. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. He felt no cold, only adrenaline and necessity. The spear, an extension of his arm, was ready. It was not a hunt of rage, but of necessity, of a deep sense of responsibility. He needed to ensure his village would survive, that the children would have food. With a swift and precise movement, he lunged, not for a brutal attack, but for a decisive action that would separate the wolf from the pack, ensuring it no longer posed a threat to the herd and would become the desperately needed sustenance. Ayana knew that every life saved in the village was worth 1,000 personal and selfless sacrifices. Winter was merciless, but human resilience, he believed, was even stronger. With a swift and precise movement, Ayana lunged. The ancestral spear, an extension of his will, sought not brutality, but efficacy. The dark-furred wolf, caught by surprise in its lateral charge, felt the impact and staggered. There was no cry of pain, but a frustrated growl and a desperate struggle to break free, as Ayana, with the strength of his ancestors and the urgency of his people, held it firmly pinned to the snowy ground. He felt the warmth of the animal's body beneath his gloved hands, its panting breath mingling with the icy vapor escaping his own mouth. There was no joy in it, only a deep sadness and the certainty that each life taken was to preserve others. His eyes, which had previously gleamed with the fury of battle, now carried the weight of responsibility, a silent tear freezing in the corner of his eyelid before it could even fall. He pressed his lips together, his jaw tense, and with a heavy sigh, ensured the wolf would no longer pose a threat to the herd, becoming the desperately needed sustenance for the village. The wolf's body, still warm, was dragged with difficulty to a safer spot, away from the pack's eyes. Ayana needed more, he knew that, but he couldn't risk a direct confrontation. The strategy was clear. Isolate, one by one. The strongest and boldest, using fire and smoke as allies. He wiped the spear on the snow, the automatic gesture of an experienced hunter, and observed the pack. Though still numerous, the line of fire and the sudden absence of one of its most aggressive members seemed to have instilled a new layer of caution in the predators. They growled, but kept a greater distance, their red eyes now reflecting the dancing flames with a glint of confusion. In the village, Anya, sitting by the fire, felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't the cold, but a strange sensation, as if the air had become denser, more charged with events. She closed her eyes, her hands clasped in her lap, and a quick vision of Ayana, bent over something in the snow, flashed through her mind. It was a blurred image, but the feeling of effort and sacrifice was palpable. A new wave of prayers rose from her lips, more urgent, more heartfelt. The children, in their dreams, turned in their reindeer hides, oblivious to the silent battle unfolding. Anya knew that the fate of each of them lay in the hands of that man, the widower who carried the burden of an entire people. Outside, Ayana felt weariness begin to weigh on his limbs, but there was no time for rest. He needed to act again before the pack recovered from the initial shock. The kindling and resin were almost gone, and the fire, though still effective, would need reinforcement. He moved with renewed determination, his eyes sweeping the landscape in search of another target. Another wolf that could be isolated without risking his own life or the safety of the herd. With each step in the deep snow, he thought of the children, of the hungry faces waiting for him, of the promise he had made to his wife. He was the guardian, the link between life and annihilation. And, amidst the biting cold and relentless darkness, Ayana found a reserve of strength he didn't know he possessed, a resilience that sprang from love and responsibility, a silent testament that the human spirit could indeed triumph over the impossible. Ayana felt the weight of the icy air in his lungs as he moved, every muscle protesting against the continuous effort and growing fatigue. The kindling and resin he had brought were dangerously scarce. He needed to keep the flames burning, not only to ward off the pack, but to create blind spots and distractions in the treacherous terrain. His eyes swept the tundra, searching for any dry branch, any piece of moss that could serve as fuel. Scarcity was an enemy as relentless as the wolves. Ayana knelt, his knees creaking in the snow, and began to search the frozen ground, his gloved hands working with a silent urgency. The wind hissed, carrying snowflakes that stung his face, almost like needles. As he struggled to replenish his small fires, the pack, previously cautious, seemed to be regaining its audacity. The growls became more frequent, and the red eyes drew closer, forming a tighter encirclement. A larger, grey-furred wolf with a scar over its left eye advanced with renewed confidence, ignoring the weaker flames. It was a leader, an experienced predator that seemed to understand the fragility of Ayana's fire barrier. Ayana perceived the imminent danger. He could not allow this wolf to break the line. With a sigh that turned into vapor in the air, Ayana rose, spear once again in hand. The pain in his shoulders was constant, but the determination in his heart was unshakable. He moved to intercept the grey wolf, using the smoke as cover. It was a dangerous dance, a ballet of life and death in the frozen darkness. He didn't want to shed blood unnecessarily, but the village's survival demanded sacrifices. His movements were precise, the wisdom of generations guiding every step. He waited for the right moment, the instant when the wolf would be most exposed, more focused on the herd than on him. In the village's main tent, Anya felt the cold intensify, not just the air's chill, but a cold that seemed to come from within, a premonition that chilled her soul. She huddled closer to the fire, but the warmth didn't fully reach her. Her eyes fixed on the entrance, and she imagined Ayana out there, alone, facing the most relentless darkness. A tear ran down her wrinkled face, not from despair, but from a deep empathy and admiration for the courage of that man, a true hero. She knew he was fighting not just for food, but for the very soul of their community, for the continuity of their lives. The children, in their dreams, seemed to whimper softly, as if the elders' unease reached them even through sleep, an echo of the invisible battle. Anya murmured more prayers, her words mingling with the crackle of the fire, a silent lament and a fervent plea to the ancestral spirits. Ayana, with a guttural cry that tore through the silence, lunged. The ancestral spear found its target with brutal precision, immobilizing the grey wolf before it could fully react. The animal howled, a mix of pain and fury, but Ayana did not yield. He felt the wolf's strength, its desperate struggle for freedom, but the image of his village's hungry faces, of his wife's eyes, gave him a supernatural and unshakable strength. He could not fail. With a monumental effort, he ensured that the second wolf would also become part of the sustenance, a promise of life amidst death. He dragged the body near the first, his breath ragged, his heart beating erratically. 2 wolves. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. The pack, now more confused and hesitant, retreated a little further, the smell of blood and the presence of the flames creating a barrier they were reluctant to cross. Ayana looked at the starry sky, a silent gratitude in his heart. The night was still long, and the battle far from over, but hope, by a slender thread, persisted. He was the guardian, and his resilience was the flame that warmed the darkness. Ayana felt his body tremble, not just from the cold penetrating his clothes, but from exhaustion. Gratitude for felling 2 wolves was a momentary relief, but the relentless night and persistent pack weighed heavily on him. The horde, though driven back by the flames, had not disappeared. Their red eyes still gleamed in the darkness. Ayana's eyes searched for fuel for the dwindling flames. He needed more kindling and resin to maintain the fire barrier, his fragile defense. The silence at times was more deafening than the howls, and Ayana, with his partial deafness, relied even more on his keen sight, the vibrations in the frozen ground, and his sharp sense of smell to detect the wolves' approach. He crouched, his gloved hands searching the snow, desperately looking for any piece of wood or dry moss. The intense cold in his fingers was torture. The pain in his knees was a constant companion, reminding him of the continuous effort. The smoke from the fires dissipated quickly in the biting wind, making the barrier less effective. Ayana knew he needed more prey for the village's sustenance, but the risk of exposing himself to a direct attack was immense. He observed the wolves, which moved in unpredictable patterns, testing the limits of the fire. The scarred wolf, which he had immobilized, had been a clear warning of predatory ferocity. The pressure of the approaching pack was palpable, and Ayana realized he needed a new tactic, as he could no longer rely solely on fire. His eyes swept the landscape, searching for an elevation, a strategic point that would give him some advantage. In the village, Anya, her face marked by worry, found no solace. The fire in her tent seemed to diminish, reflecting the flame of hope in her heart. She rose, her steps slow and heavy, and went to the entrance, pulling the reindeer hide aside. The icy wind brought with it a faint smell of smoke and something else, a wild scent that made her hairs stand on end. She couldn't see Ayana, but she felt the silent and fierce battle outside. Anya imagined the widower, alone, facing the most relentless darkness, and a pang of pride and fear invaded her. She knew Ayana would not give up, not as long as there was a thread of hope for his people. A few meters away, a small snowdrift offered a slightly better view and a higher defensive point. With a sigh of determination that turned into vapor in the icy air, Ayana began to move towards it, dragging the bodies of the felled wolves, a heavy but vital burden. Every step was a battle against the deep snow and exhaustion. He felt his heart pound, an irregular rhythm. Ayana reached the mound, panting, and placed the wolf bodies there, creating a small improvised barricade. From there, he could observe the pack more clearly. The wolves, confused, hesitated. It was the opportunity he needed. Ayana raised his spear, his gaze fixed on the red eyes surrounding him. He was not just a grieving widower, he was a warrior, the guardian of his people. The night was still long, but Ayana's determination, fueled by love and responsibility, burned stronger than any flame, promising that hope would not be extinguished. Ayana reached the mound, panting, and placed the wolf bodies there, creating a small, improvised barricade. From there, he could observe the pack more clearly. The wolves, confused, hesitated. It was the opportunity he needed. Ayana raised his spear, his gaze fixed on the red eyes surrounding him. He was not just a grieving widower, he was a warrior, the guardian of his people. The night was still long, but Ayana's determination, fueled by love and responsibility, burned stronger than any flame, promising that hope would not be extinguished. The wind howled, bringing with it the metallic scent of blood and the icy breath of the tundra. Ayana observed the pack. For a moment, it seemed that the fire and the two felled wolves had taken effect. Many animals retreated, their movements less coordinated, some even moving away into the darkness. A thread of hope ignited in Ayana's heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had understood the message. He took a deep breath, the icy air burning his lungs, and felt a pang of relief, though he knew the battle was far from over. But Yakutia had taught Ayana that nature was unpredictable and the cunning of wolves legendary. While most of the pack seemed to disperse, Ayana's eyes, sharpened by partial deafness, noticed something strange. A small formation of wolves, about 20 or 30, the most robust and darkest furred, did not retreat. Instead, they began to move in a wider circle, bypassing the herd and the snow mound where Ayana stood. They didn't howl, didn't growl. They just moved, silent, almost like shadows dancing in the gloom. Ayana felt a vibration in the frozen ground, a subtle tremor that his bare feet inside the reindeer hide boots picked up. It wasn't the chaotic movement of the retreating pack, but a deliberate, coordinated progression. The hope that had bloomed in his chest withered, replaced by a cold even more intense than the environment's. It was a tactic he had never seen before, but ancestral wisdom whispered in his mind. The wolves were trying to flank, not just the herd, but him. They were using the dispersion of the main group as a distraction, while the strongest and most cunning prepared a surprise attack from a blind spot. In the village, Anya, who had dozed off for a few minutes, woke abruptly. The fire in her tent had diminished considerably, and the cold seemed to have deepened. She felt a chill run down her spine, a premonition of imminent danger. She rose with difficulty, her eyes fixed on the tent entrance. The silence outside was heavy, different from the wind's howl. It was a silence that screamed. She knew Ayana was in danger, a danger different from what she had imagined. The children, in their dreams, seemed to stir restlessly. Anya murmured, the words almost freezing on her lips. "Spirits! Protect him from an ambush. They are smarter than we think." Outside, Ayana realized that the dwindling flames in his semicircle of fire would not be enough to deter this new maneuver. The small barricade of dead wolves, though useful, offered no protection against a coordinated, multi-sided attack. His heart pounded harder, not from fear, but from desperate urgency. He was alone, and the wolves were using his own cunning against him. Ayana needed to act, and fast, before he was completely surrounded and the herd unprotected. The night, which had once seemed an ally, now became a silent accomplice of the pack. Ayana felt the urgency tighten in his chest. The wolves' silent and calculated tactic demanded more than brute force. It demanded cunning and unshakable courage. Outnumbered, but with ancestral wisdom, his keen eyes swept the icy terrain. The snow mound, a temporary observation point, could become a deadly trap. He needed to break the encirclement, disorient the predators. Ayana noticed a small depression in the snow, a shallow valley with natural barriers. It was a risky path, but a decisive route for escape and counteroffensive. With a plan, he took his spear and, with an effort that made his muscles scream, dragged a felled wolf to the edge of the mound, pushing it into the depression. The heavy body rolled, creating a small snowslide that drew the attention of the approaching wolves. The vibration in the frozen ground confirmed the desired effect. The flanking wolves paused for an instant, confused by the unexpected movement. It was exactly what Ayana needed. With surprising agility for his weariness, he descended from the mound, using the depression as cover, moving silently like a slender shadow. His partial deafness helped him focus intensely on vibrations and visual movements, making him an even more attentive hunter to subtle details. He wasn't seeking to confront the entire pack, but rather to intercept the nearest wolves trying to close the encirclement. Ayana knew that each immobilized wolf was a small victory, a valuable piece of hope for his hungry village. In the main tent, Anya, her heart heavy with anguish, felt the children's agitation in their dreams, as if the danger outside reached them. She knew something was changing, a new and dangerous phase of the invisible battle. Her wrinkled fingers clutched a small bone amulet, her mother's inheritance, a symbol of protection and faith. "May the strength of bears and the cunning of foxes guide Ayana, our guardian," she murmured, her voice hoarse with worry and cold. She imagined herself beside the widower, but her age and fragility kept her there. Helplessness was a burden, but unshakable faith, her only weapon. Outside, Ayana moved like a ghost in the snow. He identified two young wolves sneaking behind a rock formation. Hungry eyes gleamed fiercely. He used the deep snow as disguise, his movements precise. He waited for the moment they were close enough, distracted by the herd. With a swift movement and unexpected strength, he thrust his spear to unbalance one wolf, making it collide with the other. The two fell, growling and struggling, confused and immobilized. Ayana seized the opportunity, using the spear to keep them under control. A feat of resilience and ancestral wisdom. He felt the weight of responsibility and determination. 3 wolves, 4. With each one, the promise of life for his people became more real and palpable. The night was still long, but Ayana, a widower with a broken heart but an unbreakable spirit, continued his dance with death, driven by a love that transcended cold and fear. He knew he couldn't stop, not as long as there was a breath of life in his village. Winter was cruel, but the human spirit he proved at every moment was indomitable. Ayana, with the spear firm in his calloused hands, observed the two wolves that now lay immobilized in the snow. His ragged breath mingled with the icy vapor escaping his mouth, forming small clouds that quickly dissipated in the biting air. Four lives taken to preserve the lives of his people. There was no glory in it, only the bitter necessity and the weight of responsibility accumulating on his already aching shoulders. His eyes, which had previously gleamed with the fury of battle, now carried a deep sadness, a reflection of the grief that never left him, even amidst the struggle for survival. He felt every irregular beat of his heart, every muscle protesting against the continuous effort. But the image of his village's hungry faces was a balm for the pain. The pack, though momentarily disoriented by his cunning and the loss of two more of its members, had not given up. Ayana realized that the flanking tactic, though interrupted, had not been abandoned. The smarter wolves, those with darker fur and more cunning eyes, began to regroup, maintaining a cautious distance. But their movements indicated a new strategy. They seemed to be communicating through glances and postures, a wild intelligence that Ayana respected and feared. The vibration in the ground, which his sensitive feet inside the reindeer hide boots picked up, changed from a chaotic tremor to a more measured rhythm, almost a pulse. They were preparing for something new, and Ayana knew he needed to be one step ahead, anticipating every treacherous move. The snow mound, where he had taken refuge and made his small barricade of wolves, now seemed less secure. It was an elevated point, but it also made him a more visible target. He needed more fuel for the dwindling fires, but the idea of descending and searching the tundra again, exposing himself to the pack's vigilant eyes, was daunting. Ayana wiped the spear on the snow, the automatic gesture of an experienced hunter, and felt the intense cold penetrate his gloves, numbing his fingers. Hunger and exhaustion were enemies as relentless as the wolves, eroding his resistance with every passing minute. In the village's main tent, Anya, unable to go back to sleep, sat by the almost extinguished fire. The smell of smoke and the icy air entering through the tent's cracks kept her alert. She felt anxiety grow in her chest, a tight knot that prevented her from breathing deeply. The children, in their dreams, turned and whimpered as if the elders' anguish reached them. Anya knew Ayana was in danger, a danger that grew more complex and treacherous with each passing moment. She took the bone amulet in her wrinkled hands, clutching it tightly, and began to murmur prayers to the ancestral spirits, asking for protection and wisdom for the widower. May the strength of the winds and the patience of the mountains guide Ayana, our guardian, on his solitary journey, she whispered, her words mingling with the faint crackle of the last embers, echoing the hope of a people. Outside, Ayana realized that the pack was dividing. One part, the younger and less experienced, continued to circle the herd, maintaining pressure. But a smaller group, led by the scarred grey wolf he had previously immobilized, or perhaps by a new, even more cunning leader, was moving towards the back of the mound, where the slope was gentler and the snow deeper. They were trying to isolate him, cutting off his escape route and turning him into prey. Ayana felt a shiver run down his spine, not from fear, but from a sudden clarity. They had underestimated him, but he would not make the same mistake. Ayana needed more wolves to feed the village, but above all, he needed to survive to deliver them, the promise of life pulsing in his veins. With a heavy sigh, he turned, spear ready. The night was still long, but Ayana's determination, fueled by love and responsibility, burned stronger than any flame, promising that hope would not be extinguished. He was not just a grieving widower. He was a warrior, the guardian of his people. Ayana knew the battle was far from over, but with every beat of his heart, every calculated move, he reaffirmed his promise. The human spirit, he proved at every moment, was indomitable. He could not stop, Not as long as there was a breath of life in his village. Winter was cruel, but human resilience was even stronger. Ayana observed the group of wolves moving around the back of the mound. There were 12 wolves, the strongest and most silent, led by a dark-furred one. They moved coordinately, using snow and shadows. The gentle slope of the mound, once an escape route, was now a ramp for attack. The vibration in the ground intensified, a premonition of imminent attack. He couldn't wait for them to reach the top. He needed to descend, but with cunning. His eyes swept the terrain, seeking an advantage. He noticed a narrow crevice between snowy rocks, a point the wolves would ignore. It was a risk, but an opportunity. He decided to use the felled wolves as a decoy. With effort, he dragged one of the dead wolves to the edge of the mound. Near the flanking group's approach route, Ayana, with a guttural cry, pushed the wolf. It rolled down the slope, kicking up snow and attracting predators. The wolves stopped, confused, sniffing. It was the distraction he needed. As the wolf's eyes fixed on the falling body, Ayana quickly descended the opposite side of the mound, sliding through the deep snow to the rocky crevice. His movements were swift and silent, like those of a ghost. The pain in his knees and shoulders was excruciating, but Ayana ignored it. Focused on the mission, he reached the crevice, squeezing between the rocks, where the wind howled less. From there, he had a partial view of the wolves, who were approaching the fallen body, confused. Ayana knew the confusion wouldn't last. They would soon realize the trap. In the main tent, Anya rose, anxiety consuming her. The fire almost out, the cold penetrated her bones. She felt panic. The silence outside, heavy, screamed danger. She approached the entrance, pulling the reindeer hide aside. The icy air brought with it a stronger smell of blood and the wild scent of the wolves. She didn't see Ayana, but she felt the danger. Anya closed her eyes, her wrinkled hands clutching the bone amulet. Spirits, give him the cunning of the fox and the strength of the bear. Protect him from an ambush, she murmured, her words mingling with the faint crackle of the last embers. The children seemed to whimper, a distant echo of the invisible battle. Anya knew Ayana was facing something new, more treacherous. Faith was her only weapon against helplessness. Ayana, hidden in the crevice, felt the vibration in the ground change again. The wolves had noticed his absence on the mound. The growls became sharper, and he could feel their scent intensify. They were spreading out, looking for him. Ayana took a deep breath, the icy air burning his lungs. He needed more prey. The crevice, though safe, was no place to hunt. He needed to lure them into his trap. With spear in hand, Ayana waited, his eyes fixed on the darkness. The night was his ally and his enemy. The promise of life for his village kept him standing, an unquenchable flame in his heart. He was the guardian, and his resilience, the light in the darkness. Ayana, hidden in the crevice, felt the vibration in the ground change. The wolves had noticed his absence on the mound. Growls and their intense scent revealed their search. Ayana took a deep breath, the icy air burning his lungs. He needed more prey, but the crevice, safe, was no place to hunt. He needed to lure them into his trap. With spear in hand, Ayana waited, his eyes fixed on the darkness. The night, ally and enemy, did not diminish the flame of the promise of life. He was the guardian, his resilience, the light in the darkness. Ayana knew that time was a luxury. The pack was reorganizing, and hunger and cold gnawed at him. His fingers numb, his hand firm on the spear. He looked at the rocks, seeking inspiration. The crevice, a perfect hiding place, was also a dead end. He needed something to attract them, keeping him protected for a surprise attack. His eyes swept the frozen ground. He found a piece of reindeer hide, loose from his boot. An idea sparked. Carefully, Ayana tore the hide into thin strips and tied them to the tip of his spear, creating an improvised flag. The movement and the scent of the hide, even faint, would pique the wolves' curiosity. With a slow and calculated movement, Ayana raised his spear, letting the tip with the strips appear slightly above the crevice, swaying gently. The vibration in the ground lessened, a sign. The tremor resumed, focused, indicating approach, drawn by the bait. Ayana felt his heart pound, an accelerated rhythm of anticipation and danger. Two wolves, the boldest, were the first. Eyes gleamed in the darkness, sniffing the air, confused by the scent of the hide and the absence of a body. They growled softly, testing the ground. Ayana waited, motionless, breath held. He needed them to be close enough. In the village, Anya couldn't calm down. The silence outside was oppressive, laden with tension. She knelt near the almost extinguished fire, wrinkled hands clasped in prayer. She murmured prayers to the spirits, asking for a sign, for hope. The children slept, but Anya felt Ayana's battle at a critical point. A tear slowly ran down, freezing. She trusted Ayana, but uncertainty was a burden. Outside, Ayana felt the vibration intensify. The two wolves were a few meters away, sniffing the spear. One of them stretched its neck, trying to reach the hide. It was the moment. With ancestral strength, Ayana thrust the spear up and out of the crevice, aiming to unbalance the wolf. The attack was swift and precise. The wolf howled in surprise, falling immobilized in the snow. The other retreated, startled, but hunger made it advance. Ayana spun the spear, using the first wolf's body as a shield. The second hesitated, and Ayana pushed it, making it slip and fall into the deep snow. Trapped. 6 wolves, 6 lives for the village. Ayana felt exhaustion, but renewed purpose. The night was long, but hope, stronger, burned in his heart. Ayana felt his body exhausted, every muscle protesting, but the count of 6 immobilized wolves brought a bitter edge of satisfaction. His numb fingers could barely feel the spear shaft, but his mind was sharp, focused. The cunning of the wolves was undeniable. They would not give up easily. The vibration in the ground, which had previously been an irregular pulse, now became a constant hum, indicating that more predators were approaching, drawn by the smell of blood and the curiosity of the last 2 that had been subdued. The rocky crevice, his temporary refuge, was becoming a point of encirclement. He needed to get out of there, but where? Ayana knew that a direct attack would be suicide. His eyes swept the darkness, searching for a new advantage, a weak point in the pack's relentless strategy. The moon, which had previously been hidden by clouds, now peeked out timidly, casting long, distorted shadows over the icy landscape. It was then that Ayana noticed something. The rock formation where he was hidden was not isolated. There was a series of small elevations and depressions in the snow that extended to the right, forming a winding path, almost a natural labyrinth. It was a risk, but it could offer cover and the chance to flank the flankers. With a sigh that turned into dense vapor, Ayana decided he couldn't stay still. Carefully, he squeezed out of the crevice, dragging one of the newly immobilized wolves with him. The weight was immense, but the need was greater. He would use it as bait and as an obstacle for the wolves trying to follow him. Ayana began to move through the labyrinth of snow and rocks, his movements slow and calculated, each step a silent prayer for the life of his people. The vibration in the ground intensified. The wolves were approaching, and he could feel the warmth of their bodies, even through the freezing air. In the main tent, Anya felt a tightness in her chest. The fire had completely died out, and the cold was unbearable. She huddled, hugging her knees, her prayers to the spirits becoming more urgent. The children, in their dreams, seemed to be in a deeper sleep, but Anya felt that Ayana's battle was at its peak. A feeling of helplessness invaded her, but she refused to yield. Ayana was hope, and Anya the guardian of faith. She lit a small torch with the last embers, the flickering flame a symbol of her own resilience. Outside, Ayana emerged from a depression in the snow, panting. Before him, a group of about 10 wolves, the most robust and dark-furred, awaited him. They had anticipated his movement, cutting off his route. The scarred grey wolf, which he had thought immobilized, was there, its cunning eyes fixed on him. It had not been subdued, only recovered, and was leading the counterattack. Ayana felt a chill, but also a cold fury. His ancestral spear seemed to vibrate in his hands. It was the climax. He was not just a grieving widower. He was the personification of his village's will to survive. With a cry that defied the wind's howl, Ayana advanced, spear raised, ready for the final dance. Ayana did not advance blindly. His cry was a tactic, a challenge that echoed in the darkness, breaking the oppressive silence and disorienting the wolves for a crucial instant. The scarred grey wolf, the leader, growled, but hesitated, surprised by the widower's audacity. Ayana seized this fraction of a second. Instead of attacking the leader directly, he used his spear to strike the frozen ground with a force that made the ice crack, creating a deafening vibration for the wolves, but for him, with his partial deafness, it was a confirmation of his impact. The sharp and unexpected sound, amplified by the ground, made the nearest wolves instinctively recoil. He did not stop. With fluid and swift movements, Ayana spun, using the momentum to swing the spear in a wide arc, not to wound, but to create a physical and psychological barrier. The spear tip grazed a wolf's snout, which yelped and backed away. Ayana knew he needed to break their formation, turning coordination into chaos. He pushed the body of one of the wolves he was dragging, using it as an improvised battering ram to unbalance 2 others trying to flank him. They fell, growling in frustration and confusion, momentarily trapped in the deep snow. The scarred wolf, realizing Ayana's cunning, attempted a swift advance, but the widower already anticipated it. He threw himself to the side, using the wolf's inertia against it. As it passed, Ayana extended his spear and hooked it onto the animal's hind leg, not to gravely wound it, but to make it lose its balance. The wolf howled in pain and surprise, falling heavily in the snow. It struggled, trying to get up, but the pain in its paw prevented it from moving with the same agility. The other wolves, seeing their leader wounded and disoriented, began to show signs of uncertainty. The hierarchy had been broken. Ayana, panting, but with a glint of determination in his eyes, realized the opportunity. With a final effort, he advanced on the scarred wolf, not to kill it, but to keep it immobilized, pressing the spear against its body. The wolf growled and tried to bite, but Ayana was relentless. He kept it pinned, his eyes fixed on the other members of the pack. The sight of their subdued leader, coupled with the loss of so many others and the widower's unexpected cunning, was enough. One by one, the remaining wolves began to retreat, first slowly, then in a silent stampede, disappearing into the darkness of the tundra. The hunt was over. Ayana let out a deep sigh, feeling the weight of exhaustion take over his body. He knelt in the snow, the spear still firm, but the tension draining away. The scarred wolf, still pinned, stopped struggling, its wild eyes fixed on him, a mixture of rage and defeat. Ayana knew it would survive, but the lesson had been learned. He released it, watching it limp away, disappearing in the same direction as its pack. 8 wolves, 8 lives for his village. It wasn't 800, but it was enough to stave off hunger for a while, to give his people a chance. In the main tent, Anya, who had fallen to her knees in despair, felt a sudden change in the air. The silence outside was no longer the oppressive silence of danger, but rather a silence of peace, of relief. She rose, her eyes moist, and looked at the tent entrance. A faint, pale light began to emerge on the horizon, the first sign of dawn. The cold was still intense, but hope, once a dying ember, now burned with a renewed flame in her heart. The children in their dreams seemed to breathe more calmly. Anya stepped out of the tent, her eyes fixed on the distant figure approaching the herd. Ayana. He walked slowly, dragging one of the wolves, his silhouette tired but victorious, against the rising sun. Ayana had fulfilled his promise. The herd was safe, and the proof of his courage, the felled wolves, lay scattered across the snow. The village had been saved. Ayana, the widower with a broken heart but an unbreakable spirit, had triumphed. Hope had returned to Yakutia, stronger than the harshest winter. He was the guardian, and his resilience, the light that would guide his people to a new day. Ayana, dragging the wolf, felt the weight of the night of trials. Every step was a silent victory against the exhaustion that threatened to fell him. The pale sun on the horizon tinged the sky with pink and golden hues, revealing the icy landscape in a new light. The air, though still biting, seemed less hostile, as if nature itself recognized the end of the battle. Anya, in front of the main tent, watched Ayana's figure grow on the horizon. Tears of relief washed her wrinkled face, a feeling so profound it seemed to purify her soul. Her voice caught with emotion, she extended her trembling hands towards the approaching widower, a gesture of welcome and gratitude that transcended words. Children and adults emerged from the tents. Their faces, previously frightened, now lit up upon seeing Ayana, spear in hand, dragging the proof of his victory. The silence of dawn was broken by exclamations of admiration and relief, a renewed hope. Ayana reached the village. His eyes met Anya's, a faint smile bloomed on his lips. He released the wolf. "The herd is safe, Anya," his voice hoarse but firm. "The pack is gone." Anya ran to embrace him, her fragile arms wrapping around Ayana. The two women, elder and warrior, shared a moment of pure human connection, the essence of resilience. Ayana felt the warmth of the embrace, the first real comfort in hours, allowing the night's weight to dissipate. The village men approached, full of respect and gratitude. They examined the wolves Ayana had brought, and the others scattered. 8 wolves, not the 800, but enough to break the encirclement, showing the pack that the community would not be easy prey. The herd, the life of the village, was safe. Ayana, exhausted, felt a new purpose. The pain of grief persisted, but the flame of hope he had ignited for his village burned stronger. He was no longer a widower. He was the guardian, the living legend who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. With help, the wolves were taken to the center of the village. Their hides would offer vital warmth, and the meat an important supplement. Ayana knew that the struggle for survival in Yakutia never ended. But that dawn, with the support of his people, he felt ready for any challenge. The village women offered him hot tea and food, their eyes full of admiration and affection. The children looked at him with mystical reverence, like a hero from ancient tales. Ayana, with a gentle smile, accepted the steaming cup, feeling energy slowly return. The story of Ayana, the widower who faced the wolf horde to save his people, would be told for generations. He had not only protected the livestock, he had rekindled faith and courage, proving that the human spirit triumphs over the impossible. His resilience, altruism, and unbreakable will became the light that would guide his people to a future of hope, like the morning sun. Ayana looked at the horizon, his home. Winter was cruel, but life, he knew, was stronger. He was the proof of it. Ayana looked at the horizon, his home. Winter was cruel, but life, he knew, was stronger. He was living proof. The sun, now higher, painted the sky with hues of hope. The icy air vibrated with a new beginning. The village, once immersed in the silence of fear, now resonated with murmurs of relief and gratitude. Women, their faces marked by vigil, approached, offering hot tea and looks of deep admiration. Ayana felt the warmth of the cup and human connection. Anya, with wise eyes full of dried tears, touched Ayana's shoulder. You brought the light back to us, my son. The spirits guided your spear and strengthened your heart. Her voice, once trembling, now carried the serenity of one who had witnessed a miracle. Ayana merely nodded, unable to utter words, his throat tight with emotion and exhaustion. Anya's embrace was a balm for his wounded soul, reminding him that despite the loss, he was not alone. The village men, prepared for the worst, moved with renewed purpose. They collected the felled wolves, their expressions a mix of respect for the hunter and relief for the provision. 8 wolves, a small number compared to the horde that had surrounded them, but an invaluable treasure for survival. Hides would be cured, meat processed, each piece a victory against hunger. Ayana watched, feeling sadness for what he had taken, but the certainty of his people's greater good superseded hesitation. Children, curious and full of energy, peeked from the tents, eyes wide. For them, Ayana was not just the widower, he was the hero who had danced with death and brought salvation. A small girl approached shyly, extending an ice flower. Ayana knelt, receiving the gift with a genuine smile, feeling the cold touch of the flower and the innocent warmth of the child's hand. A simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about rekindled hope. In the following hours, the sun rose and the village transformed. Fear dissipated, replaced by a sense of community and purpose. Women prepared food, men repaired fences and defenses, children played. Ayana, exhausted, felt a subtle energy. He joined the men, offering strength and knowledge in processing the wolves, teaching ancestral techniques that ensured nothing was wasted. He explained how fat became fuel, bones tools, tendons, ropes. Every part of the animal was a gift from nature, and Ayana ensured that the village honored the sacrifice. As he worked, he felt the gaze of his people, no longer pity, but reverence and gratitude. The grief for his wife was an open wound, but action, purpose, and connection filled the void. He honored her memory, protecting them. Night approached, but without terror. Fires crackled stronger, tents cozy. Ayana, sitting with Anya, watched the stars dot the sky. The full moon shone serene. The village had survived, strengthened. Ayana knew that the challenges in Yakutia would never end, but now they would face them together, with resilient hearts and an unbreakable spirit. Life, he thought, was a constant dance between darkness and light, and he was ready.